Carl Jung warned about the dark side of intuitive introverts. There's a hidden danger buried deep inside certain types of people. You don't see it right away. They're quiet, they're deep, they're thoughtful. They might be the ones who sit in the back of the room, absorbing everything, saying little. They're not loud, they're not flashy, and they're not trying to impress anyone. But Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, warned about them. Or more precisely, he warned about what happens when these people lose their way. He called them intuitive introverts. And while they often carry immense wisdom, insight, and visionary energy, they also carry the seeds of something much darker, something that can destroy them from within if they don't learn how to face it. Jung believed that intuitive introverts possess a unique access to the unconscious. Their minds don't just follow logic or facts, they swim in symbols, metaphors, dream images, and archetypes. They can often sense things others miss. They pick up on patterns that haven't fully emerged yet. They understand people without needing words. They might seem psychic, but really they're just deeply attuned to what lies beneath the surface of things. But here's the twist. That very attunement can turn against them. Why? Because the unconscious isn't always light. It's not just inspiration and creativity and spiritual wisdom. It's also shadow. It's repression. It's fear, ego, illusion, and the parts of ourselves we don't want to look at. And when someone lives too deeply in the world of intuition, when they rely too heavily on inner impressions without grounding themselves in external reality, they become vulnerable to projection, fantasy, and delusion. Jung saw this clearly. He warned that intuitive introverts could easily fall into what he called inflation, a state in which they become so consumed by inner visions that they lose touch with reality.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Think about this. Have you ever had an idea, a vision, a dream that felt so powerful, so right, that you believed it without question? Maybe you felt like you were destined for something, or that you had discovered a profound truth no one else could see. That's the gift of intuition, but also its trap. Because without grounding, without testing those insights against the real world, they can lead you into madness. You begin to identify with your visions. You start to think you are the insight. And from there, it's a short trip to arrogance, isolation, and spiritual confusion. Jung said that the danger for intuitive introverts is that they often develop a negative relation to the object. In other words, they distrust the outside world. They see it as shallow, petty, noisy, and unworthy of their attention. So they retreat inward. They live in a world of ideas, symbols, possibilities. But when you reject the outer world completely, you also lose your tether to reality. You begin to live in a feedback loop of your own mind. And that's where dark things grow. I've seen this happen. I've felt echoes of it myself. Maybe you have too. You start to isolate not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. You stop sharing your thoughts because you assume no one will understand. You begin to feel superior in your silence, but also lonelier. More bitter. You write it off as being misunderstood, but deep down, there's something else gnawing at you. A feeling that you're drifting, that you're losing touch, that your inner world has become a labyrinth without a map. Jung believed that the only way out of this was integration. That intuitive introverts must learn to balance their rich inner life with active engagement in the world. They need to bring their visions down to earth, not just dream, but build. Not just imagine, but act. Because only in the friction between inner and outer, between soul and society, does real transformation happen. Otherwise, intuition becomes a trap, a beautiful, seductive prison. Let me ask you something. Are you more comfortable in your thoughts than in your actions? Do you spend more time imagining life than living it? Do you have truths you feel deeply, but have never tested in the world? If so, you might be standing at the edge of that cliff Jung warned about. And the only way back is forward through conscious engagement with reality. But here's the good news. Your inner world is not the enemy. It's your gift, your power. The key is to learn how to wield it without being consumed by it. To translate intuition into insight, and insight into action. That's the work. That's the path. And it begins with awareness, with the willingness to look at the dark side of your own nature, not to judge it, but to integrate it. Because what Jung understood, and what we often forget, is that the shadow isn't evil. It's just unconscious. And when you bring it to light, when you face it with courage and humility, it becomes fuel for growth. But if you deny it, repress it, or romanticize it, it grows in secret. It distorts your vision. It whispers lies that sound like prophecy. And eventually, it isolates you from life itself. So if you're an intuitive introvert, this is your warning, but also your calling. You have access to depths most people never touch. But with that depth comes responsibility. Your insight is not for escape. It's for service. Your visions are not for ego. They're for embodiment. And the world doesn't need another dreamer lost in thought. It needs a soul brave enough to bring those dreams into form. When intuition becomes isolation, the dangerous comfort of living in a world no one else can see, there's a subtle shift that happens when intuition, this divine and creative force, begins to curl inward on itself. At first, it feels like awakening, like you're finally seeing patterns others can't see, sensing truths that lie beneath the surface. You feel attuned, almost prophetic. The world becomes a stream of hidden symbols, and you begin to trust your inner impressions more than anything external. But then, something changes. You stop sharing. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you believe no one will understand. You begin to live in a world no one else can see, and you tell yourself that's okay. But slowly, you're not just different, you're alone. Carl Jung knew this danger intimately. He called it the introverted intuitive's temptation, the lure of the inner kingdom, a place so rich and compelling that the outer world pales in comparison. You convince yourself that your inner visions are more real than reality itself. And in some way, they are, but only to you. The rest of the world doesn't live in that space. They don't see what you see. And when you stop translating, when you stop building bridges between your inner world and the shared world, you begin to drift into a kind of existential exile. It's a strange kind of suffering. You feel like you carry gold in your mind, but no one wants to receive it. Or worse, you begin to believe they're not worthy of it. That's when the trap tightens. What started as depth becomes elitism. What began as creativity becomes avoidance. You start to believe that the world is too shallow, too loud, too fast, too blind, and so you withdraw. You say it's for peace, but really, it's because you've stopped believing in connection. You've convinced yourself that no one can meet you where you are. And that's the most dangerous comfort of all. Because here's the truth. The inner world, as rich as it may be, is not meant to be a hiding place. It's meant to be a source, a place you visit, draw from, and then return with something meaningful to offer. But when you start living there exclusively, you lose your roots in shared experience. And that loss is devastating, not just spiritually, but psychologically. Jung warned that this kind of isolation leads to fantasies of omniscience, spiritual inflation, or even psychosis. Not because the person is broken, but because they've lost the balancing force of reality testing. They've stopped engaging with the friction of the real world, the necessary resistance that tempers vision into wisdom. Let's ask something uncomfortable. Have you ever used your depth as an excuse to disconnect? Have you ever chosen isolation not out of truth, but out of fear and pride? It's a hard mirror to face. But if we're honest with ourselves, many of us have done exactly that. We say we're protecting our peace, but sometimes we're just avoiding vulnerability. We don't want to share our inner world because it might be rejected, misunderstood, or worst of all, ignored. So we retreat deeper into ourselves, convincing ourselves that it's noble, that it's spiritual, that it's enlightened. But somewhere beneath that story is a wound, a loneliness we've dressed up in philosophical clothing. Jung believed that the salvation for intuitive introverts lies in conscious relatedness, that no matter how deep our inner world is, we must return to the collective, not to conform, but to connect, to test our ideas in the fire of conversation, to be humbled by differing perspectives, to learn how to speak our inner truths in a language others can hear. Not everyone will understand, but some will. And if even one person hears you, truly hears you, then the isolation begins to crack. The light gets in. The inner world finds its echo in the outer world. And that resonance, that shared insight, is what makes life worth living. So if you find yourself living in a world no one else can see, ask yourself, am I here because this is where I belong, or because I've given up on being seen? The answer to that question can change everything. It can open the door to healing. Because your inner world is not a fortress, it's a garden. And gardens are meant to be shared. The shadow of the prophet, how visionaries lose themselves in their own light. There's a strange paradox that haunts those of us who see more than we can explain. Visionaries, mystics, deep thinkers, intuitive introverts all carry a luminous fire inside them. It burns quietly, not with the flash of ego, but with the depth of perception. They see beyond time. They anticipate patterns long before they unfold. Their intuitions are often right, uncannily right. And that's where the danger begins. Because when you're right too often, you start to believe you're always right. When your insights are repeatedly validated, you stop questioning them. You begin to identify with the light itself. And slowly, silently, you lose yourself in it. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He understood that the light of intuition casts a long shadow. The more someone identifies with their visionary abilities, the more likely they are to confuse inner perception with divine authority. What starts as humble insight becomes a prophetic identity. The intuitive stops being a seeker and becomes a knower. But the moment you stop seeking, you stop learning. And the moment you stop learning, your light begins to turn on you. This is the shadow of the prophet, the subtle inflation of the self that comes when you mistake your gift for your identity. You begin to believe that you are the message rather than its messenger. And in that belief, you disconnect from humility, from doubt, and from feedback. You don't need others anymore, not really. You're beyond them. You're on a higher plane. And once you start thinking like that, you become untouchable. Not in the sense of being untouchable by the world, but untouchable by truth. Because truth requires friction. It requires relationship. It requires the willingness to be wrong. Jung warned that intuitive introverts, especially those with a spiritual or visionary bent, often fall prey to this kind of spiritual inflation. They carry within them archetypes, images of the sage, the mystic, the prophet, and unconsciously begin to live out those roles. But archetypes are powerful energies. They're not meant to be worn like clothes. They're meant to be integrated, not embodied. When someone begins to act out an archetype, rather than hold it in balance, they lose their personal center. They become a symbol, a persona, a myth walking in human skin. And that's incredibly dangerous, not just to others, but to themselves. Let's go deeper. Have you ever caught yourself secretly believing that you see what others cannot? That your suffering makes you wiser? That your solitude elevates you above the noise of the world? These aren't crimes of the ego. They're temptations of the soul. And they're subtle. They don't show up as arrogance. They show up as quiet superiority. As a gentle, persistent belief that your inner light is purer than the world's chaos, that your insights exempt you from the messiness of being human. But no one is exempt. No matter how deep your vision, no matter how accurate your intuition, you are still bound by the same laws of life as everyone else. You still bleed, still err, still misunderstand. And until you accept that, your light will be incomplete. Carl Jung taught that true individuation, the full realization of the self, requires not just embracing our light, but integrating our shadow. And for intuitive introverts, that shadow often hides in the very light they trust so deeply. The path forward is not to dim your light, it's to ground it, to remain in conversation with reality, to stay tethered to community, to feedback, to humility. Share your visions, but don't assume their perfection. Express your insights, but let them be challenged. You don't need to be a prophet. You need to be real. Because realness is what gives your intuition meaning. Without it, you're just another voice in the void, echoing to yourself. So here's the challenge. Can you be both visionary and vulnerable? Can you hold your deepest insights while remaining open to being wrong? Can you carry the archetype without becoming it? If you can, you won't just see the future, you'll shape it. Not as a prophet above humanity, but as a human among humans, one who has seen the light, walked through their own shadow, and returned with something worth sharing. The return to wholeness, why intuitive introverts must bring their inner world into the light of action. There comes a moment in every inner journey when the seeker must return. Return from the dream, from the vision, from the ocean of symbols and archetypes to the world of skin, time, and action. For intuitive introverts, this moment is especially difficult. Because the inner world is not only familiar, it's beautiful. It is where we've felt most ourselves, most awake, most alive. It's where our truths have spoken to us in silence, where we've communed with the eternal, where we've glimpsed the patterns that thread through all things. And yet, Jung reminds us, a life lived entirely within is only half a life. The other half waits in the outer world. And until we bring our inner world into contact with that outer world, we remain incomplete. This is the final and most essential phase Jung called individuation, not escape from the world, but integration with it. The intuitive introvert must not vanish into the mind. They must learn to embody what they know. And embodiment is not thought, it's action. It's putting into form what has only ever existed in feeling and idea. That's terrifying. Because the inner world is perfect, the outer world is not. The moment you express, you risk distortion. The moment you speak your truth, you risk misunderstanding. But risking that is the exact point, because only through that risk does your truth become real. You see, the world doesn't need your private insight. It needs your shared courage. It needs your willingness to step into the noise with something sacred and say, here, this is what I've seen. This is what I've seen. This is what I've felt. Take it, test it. Tell me what it means to you. That's what makes wisdom powerful, not that it's hidden, but that it's offered. There is no freedom in withholding your gifts, only fear. And fear, no matter how well disguised, is still fear. So ask yourself this. What have you seen that you've never spoken? What truth lives in you that has never made contact with the world? What part of your soul is waiting for you to act on its behalf, not tomorrow, but now? These are not romantic questions. They are urgent. Because when we don't bring forth what lives within us, it begins to rot. That's not poetry, it's psychology. Unexpressed vision curdles into bitterness. Untouched potential turns into resentment. And the intuitive introvert, who once carried light, begins to carry regret. But the path to wholeness is still open. It's always open. It begins simply with one act: engagement. Write the thing. Say the words. Start the project. Reach out. Serve. Build. Risk. Let your inner world meet the outer world, not as an escape artist, but as a creator. Creation is the bridge. It's the alchemy. It's where your intuitive depth stops being about you and starts becoming something for us. And don't worry about being understood immediately. You won't be. Not everyone will see what you see, but some will. And those are your people. Find them, speak to them, build something together. That's the secret Jung never shouted but always lived. Individuation is not isolation. It's connection from a place of wholeness. It's the full return of the self, not just as thinker or dreamer, but as participant in the shared world. So if you've spent years cultivating your inner life, good, that was necessary. But now it's time to return, not to conformity, but to contribution, not to noise, but to presence. Bring your symbols, bring your silence, bring your truth. The world doesn't need another voice echoing the surface. It needs your depth, but in motion, in form, in action. This is how we complete the circle. This is how we redeem the gift of intuition, not by keeping it hidden, but by living it out loud. Because the light you carry was never meant to stay inside you. It was meant to become the world.